Hi, my name is Ashley George, and I'm here with our monthly installment of our Tell Me a Story series. Today I'm here with Miss Helen Strickland, a retired English and journalism professor from ABAC, and she is going to tell me a story about her father, Hudson Lanier, and how he started a legacy of lawyers. Tell me a little bit about your father.
My father was one of 10 children born to William and Adelaide's Scarborough Lanier. There were 5 brothers and 5 sisters. My grandfather was a farmer, had pretty large acreage. The sons all worked in that. My father, in addition to being a good student, as I understand, in high school, very apt about his classwork. He was very good at helping with the farm. Another thing that he was good with is he helped my grandfather keep books on the cotton gin that he owned. That was part of the farm. When he was 18, all of them were hunters and liked shooting targets and that sort of thing. And he and his brother Jim were out one day throwing targets, taking turns, and the other one, taking aim and shooting. And while that was taking place, my Uncle Jim was using, I assume, a shotgun, and a target was thrown up. And I don't know how it happened, but the ball from the shotgun blast hit my father's elbow, his left arm elbow, which he was naturally a right-handed man. He was terribly injured. They got a doctor from town, Dr. Kennedy, and he came out and addressed the situation and treated the wound. 2 days later, Dr. Kennedy went back to check on my daddy's condition, and he was terribly ill. Infection had arisen, and when they took the bandages off of the wound, the lower part of his arm fell off. And it was just a terrible situation. And the woman that he had taken to help him as a nurse asked him, Dr. Kennedy, what are we going to do with this, meaning the arm? And Dr. Kennedy says, find a shoebox somewhere and put the arm in it. We'll put him in the ground in 2 or 3 days. Well, that was the ultimate death from the wound and the infection, but my father did not die. He had a long recovery. He was terribly ill for a while and quite weak. It took a while for him to study things over, which he was very good at, lifelong in whatever he was doing, teaching Sunday school or practicing in the courtroom or whatever. But he went to his dad and he said, I want to ask you to help me do something. That I want to leave home and I want to go to Athens, to the university. I want to study the law. I've got to have a way to support a family and raise a family, and I don't have any means now. I know, since my right arm is gone and I have only one, there is no way I can handle a plow and a team of ewes and farm as the rest of my brothers are doing. Grandpa agreed that he could go, and he helped him get there. It was a long train ride. My father, by the way, lived in East Georgia, near the coast, so it was a long train ride to Athens. I do not know how long he had been there, but it had been a while, more than a week or 2. And my dad got a letter, I guess some months later, and in that letter, he told his son Hudson, he said, I so much need you at home. I need you to help keep books and help me run the farm. And I need for you to come home. And I have heard my father more than once make these comments. He said it was the hardest letter that I think I've ever written, because I had to tell my father that I would be home. I would help with the farm, but I still needed a way that I could earn a living and be productive, and I wanted to finish my degree. As it turned out, he finished the degree. He went back home Metter. He did keep the books for the farm, but he opened an office, a law office. It wasn't long after he returned home that the county of Canada, Metter was a county seat, Canada was incorporated as a county. And he was the first county attorney, a very young man, by having a post like that.
How old was he?
He was in his 20s, but that is still a little young, and I don't know about other attorneys, but they had to have an attorney, and they thought he was apt and he could handle that, and he did. In the meantime, through the years, he and my mother had 6 children. All grew to maturity, except the second child, who was a boy. He was Waylon Hudson Lanier Jr., and a sudden illness on a Sunday morning took place, and he died before nightfall that same Sunday. So they lost, he was called Waylon. The rest of the children, there were 5 of us, and with his being an attorney, my mother a housewife, and being as frugal as possible, they managed to send all of us to college. We all earned college degrees. 3 of us received advanced degrees and were productive in the communities in which we live. I guess got started to talk in 1935 and 1936. There was going to be an opening for the post of district attorney in the Middle Judicial Circuit. And my dad was encouraged to run for that post, and he did. He was elected district attorney on September the 9th, 1936. His election took place 2 days after my birth. I was called election baby. He said I had brought him good luck. And I was called that sometime. I was the youngest of the 6 children. Daddy practiced law and continued as an attorney, as a district attorney, for 24 years. He never had opposition except that one time. In the meantime, my brother had initially attended Emory at Oxford, where he had a sterling academic record, went on to the University of Georgia, and he did well there. He was admitted to law school. My mother and daddy, because he had finished high school at 15, they thought he was too young to be starting law school. So he went to Metter, he coached football, and taught school. They hadn't let him play football in high school, but he had played intramurals at Emory at Oxford, so he knew about the game, and he was a good coach. And after a year at that post, he went back to the University of Georgia and earned his law degree. He was in the process of getting ready to take his bar exam, but he was called by Uncle Sam. Instead of taking that bar exam on that day, he had to report to Augusta, Georgia for induction in the Army. And somebody got word of it and called somebody and that sort of thing, and he was sent back to Atlanta to take the bar exam. He passed, but he still was inducted into the Army, where he served 2 years, and he came back to Metter to become my daddy's law partner. And you could say this is where the legacy really began, with Dan. When Daddy retired in 1960, my brother, Dan, ran for the post of district attorney. He narrowly lost the race to a very fine attorney from Sandersville, Georgia, and he went on with his law practice with my dad. 2 years later, the judge of the Middle Judicial Circuit passed away, and the governor appointed the DA from Sandersville to be the new judge. At the same time, he had appointed my brother Dan to become the district attorney. That was, I think, in December of 1966. By this time, of course, he had married some years before, and he and his wife Martha had 3 little girls. She had a twin sister. In fact, they lived in Valdosta. And Dan and Martha and the girls went on the, I guess, about the second weekend of September to visit the family in Valdosta. On the way home, which travels back through Lanier County and on up toward Douglas and Lyons, Georgia, and Hazelhurst to get to Metter, there was a man somewhere between Uvalde and Lyons, was hopelessly drunk, stopped by the side of the road in his car, couldn't get out, couldn't do anything. And I guess he thought he was a good Samaritan, stopped and helped him, got out, got the car cranked, and that man, who was inebriated, got back in the car to drive. And it was a short distance from that location that the man who was drunk hit my brother's car head on. Dan was 38. His wife was 34. The oldest daughter was 8. Those 3 died in that accident. They left 2 children, 4 and 6 little girls. And my daddy lost a son, his best friend, and his law partner. My mother had died a couple of years before. At 79, my father had remarried. And what a wonderful mate she was. I dare to think how rough it'd been if my dad had been completely alone when that accident happened. All right, I've told you about the first one who became a lawyer. My son came along, my husband, who had majored in animal science and actually had thoughts of studying veterinary medicine at one time. He instead majored in animal science, and he became a county agent. He was at Sylvester first, tested for 4 years, and this is when I joined the faculty at Abraham Baldwin College. Just before, we were told we were moving to Lakeland, because he'd been the assistant agent before and he was county agent here. And we moved to Lakeland, and Daddy was still, John was still talking about veterinary science and farming and that sort of thing with JJ. He went to Valdosta State. He went to ABAC his first year. Of course, I was teaching there. And he figured out that if he stayed at home and went to Valdosta State, he could make a round in the deer woods in the morning before he went to college. And he did. And he used to mention animal science. Sometimes he mentioned dentistry. He majored in business administration at Valdosta State, and he got law school on his mind. He didn't go immediately out of BSU, but he went, I think it was a couple of years later, and he received his law degree, and he came home to practice law, besides being a real homebody while he was in college at Valdosta State. A young woman in this community, 2 or 3 years younger than JJ, caught his attention, and they dated a good while, and they waited until he was through law school, and they married to Lisa Morton, and he set up his law office here. So that was the first grandchild who became a lawyer. And I suspect some of the people who are reading this article are watching this film on Facebook.
YouTube, yes.
They probably familiar with both JJ and his wife, as well as his children. Then there was another descendant came along, a great-grandson. His name was Billy Geralds. Grew up in Perry, Georgia, and he went to the university, and he majored in some form of agriculture. And he worked a couple of years in agriculture, but he decided whatever he was doing, he didn't want to always do that. came back, applied, and went to law school at the University of Georgia. He finished school, and he's been an attorney and very successful ever since in Perry, Georgia. I'm going to tell you about one more grandson, and this is just part of the story. He was valedictorian of his graduating class at private school in Perry. He went to Wake Forest for his undergraduate work, where he did very well. And following that, he came to the University of Georgia, and you can probably guess what he studied there.
Law.
As a postgraduate law. Very successful. And of course, the change in the story is, and this is a good part. Lawton Pearson is his name, Lawton Pearson III. My brother-in-law was Lawton Pearson. And the Lawton I'm talking about, the young man who studied law, ever since he finished law school, he has been growing peaches. That's because his father was a third generation peach grower, and now Lawton Pearson III is a fifth generation peach grower. So that's how it all got started, and I've thought about this story and the lineage many times, and I think about it, how dreadful, just to think about it's dreadful, but to have lived it and known that that accident happened to my father, almost to the point of dying. And it wasn't easy for him to convince his family he wanted to go to school so he could get something more, so he too could have a family and raise children. But because he did, he started a lineage of attorneys. I've been asked a time or two, and I'll go ahead and tell you, you haven't asked it, did I ever consider studying law? My brother Dan got behind me one time. This was when he was in his early practice. I was finishing school in the late 1950s at the university, and he wanted to interest me and come into the office with himself and Daddy in reading law, and then attended law school. And I had been enamored a long time with things journalistic. Started in high school, editor of the paper, editor of the yearbook, did the same kind of thing at the University of Georgia, wrote a column there. I also got inspired by people I knew who were public relations, who used their journalism background for that. And I guess maybe I watched a little too much television, because at that time, the late 50s, you didn't see many women attorneys on screen in law TV programs. And I figured if I got to be an attorney, I'd be doing somebody's research and studying. And I didn't know absolutely that I wanted to be in the courtroom, but I assumed if you're going to be a lawyer, that's part of what you did. So I rejected that and went on and got my master's in journalism. Never intended to teach school at all. But you found out because of my husband's own transfer that that was my option. And somebody saw something that say, hey, we need a journalism out of this 2-year college. And this woman has been good in the classroom, but she's a journalist. She knows about this, and she likes it. But it all started, I feel like, with the accident.
It all started with something bad that turned into something very good.
That's right. It did for us. I always wish that. I wish that with my own children, my grandchildren, and that's too much to hope for. But I wish it with you two women who are with me now. I wish there was a way, maybe if we had the equipment that you have today, that would be possible, that you could have heard at least one talk in church, or one Sunday school lesson, or one talk at a family reunion, and hear my daddy speak and the yarns and the stories he could tell, I would be surprised if you wouldn't be mesmerized, because I frequently was. A lot of other people too. He spoke at our church one time, Nikki. He was a speaker, and he brought his stories to the Lakeland United Methodist Church. And some of the older members probably recall having heard him.
Well, thank you very much for telling that story. That was an amazing story coming from a horrible accident. Thank you for joining us this time. Join us next month as we'll have another Tell Me a Story. Thank you very much, Ms.